All right, so in the last tutorial, we created this asteroid here. And what I'd like to do is randomly spawn this asteroid across the top and have it move down towards our ship so that when we shoot it, we can stop it. So let's go ahead in our scripts folder and create a new C# script. And what this will do is this will actually serve as our random spawner. So let's do random spawner. And once you've created the script random spawner, let's go right ahead and create an empty game object in our scene here. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to create empty. And I'm going to name this random spawner as well. Now, let's make sure we spell everything correctly. Now, I'd like to make this a prefab, so I'm going to drag this into the prefabs folder. The reason for this is, say you'd like to take this game and you'd like to have it create like robots or whatever that are randomly spawned. There's a lot of usage behind having a random spawner sort of manager. So here's our prefab, and I'm going to go ahead and while it's selected here, I'm going to go ahead and drag this random spawner script here. Now don't forget, you always have to apply all to lock in any changes you make here. Let's go ahead and double click this random spawner script and open it inside of Visual Studio and start to write some code. All right, here we are in Visual Studio. Let's go ahead and make a space at the top. And what I'm going to do, so I don't force you to watch me type all this out, is I'm going to pause the video and create a game object called spawn prefab that we will use to identify which object we'd like to spawn. All right, so you can see that we have a public game object so that we can access it in the scene. And what I'm going to do is drag the asteroid model into the spawn prefab variable. Next, what we can do is I'm going to create a variable, or a function rather, and what this function does is this handles actually spawning our prefab. So let me pause the video and I'll write that function or method out. Alright, so I created it below our start and our update. And we're going to be using these both for creating the spawning our objects as well as testing how many times we want it to run. So for instance, I'm going to go ahead and highlight this spawn objects method, and it's empty. And I'm going to call it right when this script appears. So that's here. So what happens is as this, the second this object is loaded into the scene, it's going to call a spawn objects. It's going to call this method. Well, what do we want to do in this method? Well, if you recall from before when we did the photon bullet, we instantiated a object. So let's say that the second this loads, we want it to spawn a prefab. And the prefab that we want to spawn is this one. Well, this is great, but we'd like to control the position in which it spawns, as well as the rotation and all of that other good stuff. But for now, let's save this and go back to Unity and take a look at what essentially the thought process on how we're going to do this. Okay, so we have our random, let's exit out of that prefab area. We have our random spawner prefab here, and it looks like we have a duplicate of it in our scene. So let's go ahead and delete this because all we really need is the prefab. And what I want to randomly spawn is this asteroid. Now, if you recall, all we did so far is on this object itself, this asteroid, is we really don't have necessarily any script here. We're not making it move or anything like that. And in our random spawner here, all we have is that it instantiates or it spawns this object somewhere, right? So we have our random spawner position here. So let's move this off in the scene. And let's go ahead and press play and see what happens. Now, you can see here we have asteroid and then we have asteroid clone. Well, where's that asteroid clone? Well, it spawns it right on top of the original game object. And if we look at the position of our asteroid spawner, it's here. Now, I don't want to use the position of the initial asteroid or this random spawner object. I'd like it to randomly spawn the object or instantiate it across the top of our scene here. I also like my asteroid to move, and if you look here, this is along the z-axis, down towards our ship, blowing it up. The places I'd like it to randomly spawn is actually across this x-axis here. So that way we would have like them different or different asteroid rather spawning on each section, and then it'll move down on its z-axis towards the ship. So let's go ahead and I'm going to leave this one in the scene because, and actually to be honest with you, I can delete this out now that I have that random spawner, and I can press play and it should randomly spawn. Oh, you know what? Let's make sure that we update it here. So if I go in here and I drag this asteroid in, now when I press play, it should update this random spawner here. And if it does not, which looks like it didn't, it looks like we have to update our random spawner. So let's drag this new random spawner in here. Let's delete this one. And the new one that we've updated has it saved automatically in there. And you can see now it spawned a asteroid. But recall, we want multiple asteroids to be spawned and we want to set their position. Let's return to Visual Studio and see this in action. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a variable. And this variable is also going to be public. And what the data type is going to be vector3. And we're going to call this spawn position. Now, what's important about this spawn position object is when I save this, I can go in and adjust the X, Y, and Z within this. And we're going to use this to essentially control where the object is going to spawn. So we know now when we hit instantiate, all we're doing now is spawning in the asteroid that we dragged inside of here. Well, let's say I want it to be spawned across a random range. Now, actually, instantiate has 3 different positions. We have the object we want to spawn, and we also have the X, Y, and Z values. So there's a method, and it's called random.range. So I'm just going to type it up here for now, and then I'll copy it in. And this random.range takes 2 different positions. So I'm going to actually tab this out because it looks like it did a pretty good job of filling this out for me. And I'm going to put a minus here. And what this is saying is we're going to go with the negative value of X and the positive value of X for this random range. So let's go ahead and plug this inside of our instantiation method below, and then we'll jump back into Unity and see how to set this up. All right, so what I'm going to do is store these values inside of a variable. So let's do vector3, and let's space this out just a little bit so it's easier for readability. And then I'll call this random spawn POS for position. And I'll make this equal to a new vector3. And let's go ahead and wrap this. I'm going to actually close this out so we get a little bit more room. Now, this vector3, this is going to be our X position. If you recall, this is the left and right. And let's close this out as well here. Now, we're getting a little bit of an error because we need 3 values. We need the X, which we have here. We need a Y, which I'm going to actually just reuse this spawn position here. And it's going to be .Y. And then we're going to control the Z-axis of this spawn position by doing spawn position.z. So what we should get now, and what this random range method does is whatever range that we want specified within this, it'll automatically spawn an object randomly between those 2 values. But we don't know what those values are yet because we want them to be the width of our screen. So let's go back into Unity after saving this and take a look at how we can update this. All right, here we are back in Unity. If I drag my asteroid back into the scene, you can see that we have a pretty wide screen here. But let's say we wanted our game to be a 16:9 aspect ratio. If I move my asteroid all the way to the left side of the screen, we get a value of roughly -50. And if I move my position all the way to the right side of the screen, it's, let's say, we want to do 49. So, 43. So let's see, if we do 43, and then we do -43, let's see what range that gives us. So that's a pretty good spread. So inside of my random spawner here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set that position to just 43. If you recall before, I had put in my code here that the random range was the position of x minus x. So that's, if I put in a 43, this will automatically make it a minus 43 value, and then this is the 43. Now for the y value, you can see it's currently set, back in Unity, it's currently set to 0, and then my z is set to 0. So I'm going to press play a few times, and we're just going to see how it randomly spawns across that axis. So you can see we have one in the middle, and oh, one last thing. So the reason why I keep spawning in the middle is back in Visual Studio, I forgot to actually add this random spawn position inside this instantiation. So the instantiation method here takes 3 values as well. The object I want to spawn, as well as like the position, and then we can set one more value. But let's just paste in random spawn position here. And we have to make this we have to assign new memory for that. So it's new vector 3, random spawn position. And then we will add 0 to the z-axis. You know, actually we don't need that. And let's just do 0.0f. It's a floating point value. And what might make it easier is let's just take this spawn position here. And that's probably a little bit clearer. And we'll use the spawn position dot rotation. Actually, what might be a little bit better is if we created a new variable just to store the rotation. So let's make a new variable here, and I'll pause the video and come back, and so you don't have to watch me type all this up. All right, so this is essentially what we did. I went ahead and created a new variable of the quaternion data type. Now, quaternions, you'll see them a lot if you have experience in linear algebra or calculus math, but I don't want to scare you. Just think of a quaternion as a rotation with within a 3D object. So say you have a 3D model, and the way that object rotates is usually calculated in quaternions because it has a little bit more than a flat 2D object. So for now, just think about this, that we're creating a variable that stores the rotation of the object that this is currently on. So right now we're just saying that this variable has the ability to store rotation. It's set to 0 by default here. So it's just going to follow whatever rotation the object has. So I took that spawn rotation variable name and I plugged it in the third axis. So just to be clear, what we're doing is we're instantiating or spawning the asteroid at a random position, and then the rotation of that object is going to be just facing forward. Later, we can actually randomize this rotation so that the object is sort of always rotating. But let's go ahead and save this and return to Unity. Now, when I press play, we should be able to see the object spawning randomly. Let's see, there we go. You can see it's at different positions. Now, I don't necessarily want it down here. So let's make sure that, let's see, here's our rotation spawner. Here's the z-axis. So if you look at our asteroid here, its current position on the z-axis is 42.5. Let's say we do 40. Now, ideally, we want it off screen and then coming down, but this is just for demonstration purposes. So in our random spawner here, we don't want it at 0, right? So if we move this object to 0, it's down here. We want it to be at 42. So with our random spawner selected here, let's go ahead and change the z-axis to 42, and now it should spawn up there. So you can see we're getting different positions that it's spawning. So what we'll do in the next video is we'll have it so that it starts to go down towards our spaceship.